I said last Sunday that I was feeling unsettled. I think it was at the 8:30 live stream. And I've thought about this since, about why it might be. And I think although there's a lot of factors that could affect it, it's getting darker, we're in another lockdown, and all kinds of other stuff. One of the main ones that I think has contributed to this has been feeling ill-equipped or unqualified for what I've been asked to do. I found myself planning live streams and devotionals to encourage and to bring hope and help draw us closer to God. But at the same time, I was feeling fairly empty and discombobulated myself. Initially, I thought, I'm not cut out for this. How can I help others when I can't help myself? But I was reminded of a verse in Hebrews that tells us about a unique quality of our God compared to other gods. And it says this: "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin." And so I was strangely encouraged. 10 years ago, when I moved to Sutton, young and enthusiastic, I felt like I could do anything. 10 years on, I can probably do more things better, except if it involves physical fitness. And yet I feel somehow less able and weaker. If I'm not wrong, I think this is something that comes to most of us at some point. As we're confronted with more challenges, we become more aware of our shortcomings and our weaknesses. However, this isn't always a bad thing, because as with Jesus, this allows us to empathise with others who also experience their own weaknesses and struggle with temptations. Peter Scazzero is the author of a book called The Emotionally Healthy Church. He wrote this: "In emotionally healthy churches, people live and lead out of brokenness and vulnerability. They understand that leadership in the kingdom of God is from the bottom up, not a grasping, controlling, or lording over others. It is leading out of failure and pain, questions and struggles, a serving that lets go. It's a noticeably different way of life from what is commonly modelled in the world and unfortunately in many churches." This kind of flipped things on their head for me. And it made me realise, in fact, I was not failing for feeling weak and unsettled. I was actually failing for thinking that I had to always be strong and feeling wonderful. That was not the way that Jesus led, and it shouldn't be the way that we aspire to be as we get alongside other people. Instead of squashing or ignoring the times when we feel weak, we can use them to help us grow in empathy, humility, and grace. We're all called to love others. Relationships with God and with others are central to our faith, and yet these can be ruined or remain shallow if we refuse to be real and admit our weaknesses and when we're struggling. Sarah Shizler Goff writes, "Not paying attention to emotions can make relationships with others, including relationships with God, more difficult, full of tension and strife and less authentic. Unawareness and inauthenticity make it much more difficult to practice spiritual disciplines and to grow into the image and likeness of God." So, next time you're feeling like a failure, weak and not good enough for what you need to do, remember, Jesus knows what this feels like, and unlike us, he was able to go through that and yet not sin. But instead of rejecting us for our mistakes, he's used his position of perfection to save us from our position of failure. And this is the place where we should live from, a place where we authentically accept our weaknesses and vulnerability, and therefore live out of a dependence on God's grace rather than a dependence on our own strength and perfection, which will always fail us. I wrote this, my thoughts behind this devotion. I wrote them down yesterday before I finished work. I just sort of jotted down a few notes. And after work, I was flicking through a book that had come in the post that day. I'd ordered it for Advent, and I was just flicking through it. It was secondhand, and I was just having a quick look to see what I thought of it. And it just happened to fall open on a page where the previous owner had messily underlined something. And so out of curiosity, I looked to see what they'd underlined. And it was this: you aren't equipped for life until you realise you aren't equipped for life. You aren't equipped for life until you're in need of grace. Why not spend a few moments reflecting on this as you listen to our worship group? There's a link underneath here in the caption where you're listening or watching to this, to a song that our worship group has sung that reminds us we are weak and full of shortcomings. But we're not called to love others out of our own strength. We're called to be authentically grounded in God's grace and love for us. It's not our goodness or abilities that will save us. It's His grace that will bring us home.